The Wooing of Leola by Mrs. Alex McVeigh Miller. Copyright 1905 and 1906 by F.M. Lupton. Now in the public domain. Chapter 8. Winding a Web. When Miss Tuttle and Leola were alone together, they talked over the news, and neither one was very well pleased. The girl, since their coming would break up her happy days with Ray, and the governess because the Sterlings were always supercilious with her, and naturally made more work for the household. "I do not see why I should put myself out to wait on pretentious fine ladies this warm weather, especially when my employer has not paid $1 of my salary for 5 months," she complained, and Leola added, "There will be no more good times with Ray, for like as not they will join hands with Uncle Herman in persecuting him, and try to have me marry old Bennett because he is rich. Oh dear! I'm sorry Ray isn't coming back tonight, so I could tell him not to come tomorrow." "You might send word to him in the morning before they come," suggested Miss Tuttle, and Leola agreed to the plan, which would have worked itself out all right, had not fate decreed that Leola's little messenger should lose the note, and widower Bennett find it. He was riding briskly towards Wheatlands, when his fine bay mare shied wildly at a square white envelope blowing about in the dusty road, and an impulse of curiosity made him dismount and pick it up. When he saw Leola's familiar writing on the sealed envelope, he was seized with such poignant wrath and jealousy that no scruple of honor prevailed to prevent his becoming master of the contents. "To Ray Chester, the young dandy. Wonder if she's given him the mitten as she did me yesterday," he muttered wrathfully, and broke the pretty seal of blue wax with a ruthless hand. The blood bounded hotly through his veins as he read, "My own darling Ray, you must not come in the morning as usual because the Sterlings are coming, Uncle Herman says, and I do not want them to know of our engagement yet, for they both are very mercenary and would take sides against you and want me to marry old Bennett because he is rich while you are poor. As if I would have that dumpy old fright on any terms. No, not even if he were President of the United States. Oh, why didn't the old silly lose his heart to dear Miss Tuttle instead of me, when she loves the very ground he walks on, and would make him such a suitable wife? Fate seems to play at cross purposes with us, my darling Ray, but we will outwit our enemies and be happy yet. You had better not come to Wheatlands today, but if you will stay in all afternoon, I will try to make an errand to Widow Gray's, and we can talk things over and make plans for the future. Oh, isn't it just hateful the way things seem to work against our happiness? Just think, if only Jessie Sterling hadn't got engaged to a fortune already, we might get my rotund suitor in love with her, and she could have all the money she craves. Be sure to stay in until I come this afternoon. Your own loving Leola." Widower Bennett stamped upon the ground in fury, hissing out epithets she had used in writing of him in the bitterest voice ever heard. "Old Bennett! Dumpy old fright! Old silly! My rotund suitor! She would not marry me if I were President of the United States. Why, now I swear I will marry the little spitfire if it costs me my fortune." In this rage he remounted his mare and galloped on to Wheatlands, between whose master and himself there ensued an excited interview. Leola's letter refusing Bennett's hand was exhibited in furious anger by the slighted recipient. "She would prefer to marry a younger man than me, and she recommends me to take Miss Tuttle, that skinny, homely old maid, almost as old as I am," he blustered wrathfully, adding, "You promised faithfully she should marry me, Herman, but instead of watching her as you ought, you go poking among your old chemicals as blind as a bat, and let her get engaged to a pretty-faced young jackanapes from the city, a pauper without $1 to support his wife on, sir, and yet it lacks only a few days of the time set for my marriage to that saucy girl, and mind you, if the ceremony is not pulled off in due time, I'll lose not a day, I swear, in foreclosing the mortgage." It was in vain that Wizard Herman tried to pacify him, saying that he would certainly keep his promise, and that he was sure that there was some mistake about Leola's engagement to young Chester, who was almost a stranger. But at this point Bennett produced his proof in the shape of Leola's letter to Ray. "This is worse than I thought, but it does not alter the fact that the girl shall be your wife, Bennett, for I have sworn to keep my promise, and I will not fail you, by heaven," vowed Herman, continuing, As for neglecting to get matters into shape, that is false, for I have been quietly working to the promised end all these weeks. But, having encountered such determined opposition from the girl, I thought it expedient not to press her too hard, but to depend on force and cunning, since fair means failed. In fact, one of my objects in going to New York was to enlist the aid of my clever half-sister, Mrs. Sterling, in accomplishing the end in view. She will arrive with her daughter this morning, and although I admit that the case looks unpromising now, I believe we will soon wind a web around Leola from which she cannot escape. Go home, Bennet, and rest easy in the thought that before the end of a week she will be your charming bride." The prospective bridegroom beamed with joy and assured Herman that he was ready to cooperate in any plan proposed for Leola's subjugation. "I will go to any length now to punish her for her contempt, and for advising me to marry a skinny old maid like Amanda Tuttle when I'm rich enough to buy a lovely young girl for a bride," he vowed coarsely, and took leave with renewed hope. In the hall, as he was going out, he encountered Miss Tuttle and fancied she might have been eavesdropping from her air of confusion, but he stalked past her with a curt nod that cut to her tender heart like a knife. "Oh, what has come over him when he used to be so friendly? Can it be that he is angry at Leola's suggestion that he should court me?" sighed the poor thing deprecatingly. It would have been well indeed if she had been listening, as Bennet suspected, for then she might have been able to inform Leola of the perils that threatened her in the joining of forces of Wizard Herman and his worldly-wise sister. But she had only been loitering about the hall in hopes of a little interview when he came out, and tears of disappointment brimmed over in her kind grey eyes when he passed her with so indifferent a greeting. As she followed to the door and watched him galloping away toward home, she saw the carriage coming with the Sterlings, and ran to tell Leola the news. Chapter 9. What the Robins Heard. By and by, when Jessie removed the dust of travel, and freshened herself up with a dainty blue gown that just matched her sky-blue eyes, the two girls strolled out upon the lawn and presently found seats in the favorite rose arbor, where the robins, nesting overhead, made a mighty twittering in vain protest against their unwelcome intrusion. "It is because you are a stranger, Jessie," laughed Leola. "It is quite different when Ray and I come here together. They treat us quite as if we belonged to the Robin family." "Who is Ray?" asked Jessie curiously. Leola could not help blushing furiously, but she said as carelessly as she could, "Oh, only one of our neighbors." She was inwardly furious with herself at this slip of the tongue that was destined to lead her into self-betrayal. Ah, how true it is that a name that is close to the heart must often rise to the lips. To distract Jessie's attention, she asked, all in a breath, "When are you going to marry your grand rich lover, Jessie?" "My wedding will be in October," fibbed Miss Sterling, who had no mind to confess that she had lost the prize, and she continued, "Mr. Olyphant has gone on a yachting tour with some friends now, and I do not know exactly when they will return. It was expected they would only be gone 2 weeks, but they extended the trip. I miss him very much, and I shall be quite frantic if he stays much longer." "Then you love him very much?" queried Leola with shining eyes. "Love him? I should say so!" cried Jessie eagerly. "Why, Leola, he is as handsome as a picture, tall, with an elegant figure, fine features, brown curly hair, and beautiful laughing blue eyes." "So has Ray!" cried Leola, then bit her lips in confusion, sighing to herself, "What a lovesick little goose I am, giving away my dangerous secret in spite of myself." "Ray again!" cried Jessie suspiciously. "Come now, tell me all about him, Leola. A neighbor, you said, but I knew no one of that name about here last summer. You say he has laughing blue eyes like Chester Olyphant, so you must be fond of him, this neighbor. Confess now, is he your lover?" "Oh, nonsense, Jessie, we were talking of your lover," cried Leola. "Go on, please. Tell me more of him and of your love for each other." "We are perfectly devoted to each other," declared Jessie unblushingly. "How could I help loving him with all that money?" "But, Jessie, if Mr. Olyphant were poor, would you not love him just the same?" Jessie had a red rose in her hand, and she tore it to pieces with absent-minded fingers as she replied bluntly, "Bah! I wouldn't permit myself to love a poor man if he were a perfect Adonis." But artless Leola, with rosy cheeks and glowing eyes, retorted, "Then you do not know how to love, Jessie, not even the meaning of that sacred word, for I would adore Ray Chester if he had not a second coat to his back." "Ray Chester! There you go again!" cried Miss Sterling with a violent start. "Oh, come now, you are madly in love with some man, Leola, and you have got to tell me all about it this minute." "Oh, you are mistaken," cried poor Leola, trying to flounder out of her difficulty. "I am not mistaken. Oh, no! I know all the signs of love, and you cannot even keep his name off your lips," cried Miss Sterling triumphantly. It was true. Leola realized it and felt how impossible it was to keep hidden the happy secret of her love. Indeed, she fairly ached to tell it to some sweet, sympathetic girlfriend, and why not Jessie, whom she had known from childhood and who had always been fairly friendly? True, the young lady was 23, 4 years older than herself, but as each was madly in love with a splendid young man, there was a bond of sympathy between their hearts that might bring good results if they fairly understood each other. She suddenly made up her artless mind to confide in beautiful blue-eyed Jessie and beg her to intercede with her guardian to consent to her happiness, but because tears were very close to her own dark eyes, she put Ray aside for a moment to recover herself, saying, laughingly, "Only think, Jessie, I have a rich lover too. Our neighbor Giles Bennet, who has gotten rich by coal since his wife died, wants to marry me, the little girl he used to dandle on his knee. Now what do you think of that?" "A splendid match for you, Leola, and I hope you will accept him," declared Jessie frankly. "Oh, no, no, no!" Leola cried out quickly, and Jessie retorted, "More fool you, then, to let such a chance slip through your fingers. If I weren't going to marry Chester Olyphant, I'd take old Fatty off your hands myself. But it seems, from what you let slip just now, that there's a poor young man in the case. Ray Chester, you said, and if you do not tell me the whole story instantly, I shall die of curiosity." Leola, with her beautiful face glowing like a rose, exclaimed, "I don't want you to die, Jessie, so I'm going to fess, as the children say, and after all, I think I ought to confide in you, for it is through you all this happiness has come to me." "Through me!" gasped Jessie, and her lips went white, while a cold hand seemed to press all the life from her heart with a swift, horrible suspicion that, centered around that name Chester, breathed so sweetly just now from Leola's lovely lips. But Leola did not observe these signs of emotion. She was looking down bashfully and playing with a bunch of red roses in the belt of her simple white gown. Her beauty was glorified by the love that thrilled at her heart. "I will begin at the beginning first of all, and tell you how I saved Ray Chester's life," she said softly, and, as before, her voice seemed to linger over that name like a caress. Miss Sterling did not answer a word. She sat still and pale, listening, with a horrible presentiment of what was coming, and a hatred for innocent Leola, a jealous hatred that was more bitter than death. Leola, still playing with her roses in bashful confusion, looked down with the curly lashes sweeping her rosy cheeks, and told her story briefly, sweetly, and with the simplicity of strong emotion, dwelling but lightly on her own heroism in saving Ray Chester's life, and touching reservedly on their love story, but bringing into prominence his confession that he had fallen so desperately in love with her pictures that he had come to seek her and offer his love. She concluded gently, "And although Ray has never once mentioned your name, he did not deny it when I said that I was sure it was you from whom he got the pictures. And, Jessie, dear, I am so glad you took those little snapshots of me, for through them has come the happiness of my life, and I shall always be glad Ray saw them and loved me." The musical voice ceased speaking, but as Jessie made no answer, Leola added ardently, "He is only a poor artist, my darling Ray, but I am glad after all that he is poor, for he knows I love him for himself alone, for his own true worth, as the poem says, you know, Jessie." She gave a violent start when Miss Sterling answered in a hoarse, concentrated voice of hatred and bitterness. "You are a silly little fool, Leola Mead." "Oh, Jessie!" And Leola's voice trembled with wounded feeling. She looked up and saw that her companion was deadly pale and trembling. "Oh, what is the matter? Are you ill, Jessie? Have I wearied you with my story?" Miss Sterling was very cunning, or very brave. She had got a heart wound, but she would not cry out against the hand that struck the blow. After that one passionate outburst, she struggled for calmness. With a hollow laugh, she answered, "I am very, very tired after my long journey from New York, and the sun is very hot, but I shall be better presently." "Shall I go and bring you a little sip of wine?" urged Leola, and Jessie assented. She was glad to be alone for one moment, to cry out loud at the fate that had parted her from the man she loved. "Mamma was right, and I was wrong. He was in love with her after all, and he came here instead of going yachting as he intended. Came here to woo this simple rustic, won by her wondrous beauty that was more dangerous than I dreamed. But he shall never marry Leola Mead, never. Why, I think I would murder her first. And what will he say when he finds me here? Above all, why is he masquerading under a false name and pretending to be a poor artist? Ah, I have it! He means to deceive the silly girl. His intentions are dishonorable, but I will unmask him. I will break up the affair. I swear it!" clenching her white hands desperately. Leola came back with the wine and a biscuit, and Jessie accepted eagerly. "Wine always clears my brain somehow, and I have got a lot of scheming and planning to do," she thought, as she drained the last drop and munched the sweet biscuit. "Ah, you look better now. I am afraid it quite unnerved you hearing all about that accident to Ray," exclaimed Leola tenderly. Yes, it was dreadful. It made my flesh creep. Besides, I was very tired, you know, and that made it worse. But I am ever so much better now, thanks to the wine. Really, Leola, you were quite a heroine, and I cannot wonder that my artist friend fell in love with you, though I cannot for the life of me remember any man by that name, Ray Chester. I know I loaned your pictures to my lover, Chester Olyphant, but it cannot be that he came here to deceive a poor innocent country girl because of her pretty face. Oh, no, I cannot believe that of my lover. It is a good thing I came in time to thwart his evil designs, if he really is my Chester, but, ah!" She looked up wildly, for a man's step crunched on the ground, and the next moment he stepped into the arbor. Ray Chester, or Ray Olyphant, cool, handsome, smiling, like the villain in the play. Miss Sterling sprang to her feet with a thrilling cry. The next moment she flung herself on his broad breast, her arms about his neck, crying joyously, "Chester Olyphant, my own darling, naughty, runaway boy!" Chapter 10. Chester Olyphant's Curse. Had an earthquake rent the solid ground beneath Leola's feet, she could not have been more terribly shocked. She had listened in horror, with a wildly palpitating heart, to the words that slipped from Miss Sterling's cruel lips. Listened, with the blood leaping like fire through her veins, to the suspicions suggested so coolly. But at the sudden and startling finale, when her rival sprang joyously to the breast of her lover, at this shocking finale, Leola's blood, from coursing like liquid fire through her veins, swiftly congealed to ice. Her face went white as snow, her heart stopped its wild pulsations, and she sank upon the ground, limply, like one dead. And overhead the sun shone on in the clear blue sky, and the merry robins sang among the roses as if love and life had not seemingly come to an end together for stricken Leola. But if that terrible swoon had not overtaken her at that crucial moment, Leola would have seen her lover recoil in anger from Jessie's embrace, and push her gently but decisively away, saying rebukingly, "Miss Sterling, pray remember that our brief engagement ended long ago, and that this advance on your part is in the worst possible taste." If she had been conscious, instead of lying like a dead girl on the ground amid the ruins of her happiness, she would have seen Jessie Sterling sink down and clasp Chester's knees, and with burning tears beseech him to love her again because she could not endure life without him. She would have heard these passionate prayers repulsed. She would have heard Chester Olyphant saying coldly, "Words are useless, Miss Sterling, for, after all, I never really loved you, and you entrapped me somehow into an engagement that my heart never sanctioned. The glamour of passion quickly faded, and when your own folly gave me an excuse to gain an honorable release from fetters that began to gall, I was glad to retreat with honor. I have to tell you things thus frankly, because it is the only way out of your efforts at a reconciliation that can never be effected, since my whole heart is given to another." All the while he was unconscious of Leola, lying there like a dead girl on the ground, and he continued impatiently, "Pray get up, Miss Sterling. It is embarrassing to have you kneel to me. Be seated, I beg you, and calm yourself. This is certainly a very unexpected rencontre. I did not know you were at Wheatlands. Has not Leola, then, told you she is my promised wife?" Sinking sullenly to the arbor bench as he raised her to her feet, she hissed furiously, "The silly little rustic told me she was in love with a man named Ray Chester, but how was I to guess that her poor artist lover was the millionaire society man, Chester Olyphant, masquerading under a false name and guise, perhaps to deceive a pretty, ignorant country girl with more beauty than brains?" He recoiled in horror from her bold accusation. His handsome face went white. His blue eyes flashed lightning. "How dare you?" he thundered, clenching his fist. Then it fell helplessly to his side. "You are a woman. I cannot strike you. I can only reason and explain." "Yes, explain if you can, for your conduct certainly appears very suspicious," Jessie Sterling answered with a bitter, taunting laugh that nearly drove him wild. And yet, in all his anger, he knew she was right. It did look bad, this masquerade, and although he despised the girl, he knew he must explain for Leola's sake. Still unconscious that his bonny sweetheart lay upon the ground, so close that if he stepped backward he must stumble over her senseless form, he glanced out of the arbor to see if she was coming, and then turned back to Jessie, saying hoarsely, "It looks suspicious, I grant you, but when a man is cursed with immense wealth, and knows himself constantly the prey of designing women wanting to marry him for his money, is it not excusable that, by a little harmless deception, he may win a girl's heart by love alone, and thus ensure his future happiness?" "Bah! A slim excuse!" she sneered, but restraining his resentment, he continued earnestly, "This, I swear to you, Miss Sterling, was my only reason for the little deception I practiced on Leola, and my plan succeeded well. I have won for my own the sweetest, truest heart that ever beat, and I had decided last night to come here today to confess all to Leola and her guardian, and to press for an immediate marriage, in order to save her from the persecutions of a rich old man who has Mr. Herman in his power, by reason of a mortgage on his property. It was my design to relieve his embarrassment by advancing the amount myself to pay off the mortgage. I hope you will accept this truthful explanation, and forego the gratification of your unwise spite by any persecution of my dear little love Leola, whom I must now seek." "You will not have far to seek. Look behind you on the ground," Miss Sterling answered with a bitter laugh. Then for the first time he became aware of Leola's presence, Leola lying like a dead girl on the ground at his feet. In the one moment that he stood gazing down like a statue of despair, Miss Sterling cried with triumphant malice, "Just before you came in, Leola and I had had a very satisfactory explanation, for I recognized you in her description, and I soon made her understand your villainy. Yes, I told her you were betrothed to me and that you were deceiving her. She believed me and despised you, and just at the moment of your outcry against you, when you entered and I sprang to your breast, claiming you for my own, she dropped like one with a bullet in her heart, and there she has been lying ever since, and more than likely the poor deceived girl is really dead of the shock." "Fiend!" he hurled at her bitterly, and sank on his knees by Leola, frantically searching for signs of life, kissing her cold white face, calling on her in love's holy name to waken for his sake and speak to him again. Jessie Sterling, listening with outward cold indifference, prayed that Leola would never answer those vows of love, never open her sweet dark eyes again, prayed that death might indeed claim her for his own. And she smiled when all his efforts and all caresses proved vain to bring life back to the stricken girl. Smiled even when he turned to her with accusing eyes and cried in bitter agony, "Your false words have broken my little love's heart and slain her as surely as if you had struck a dagger into her breast. You have murdered an innocent girl who never wronged you, Jessie Sterling, yet you sit there and smile like the fiend you are. Do you think you can ever know any happiness after this? No, for my hate will follow you through life, and my curse will darken your days and make sleepless your nights till you pray for death's release." He ceased and turned back to Leola, kissing her cold face and hands with burning lips. Then lifting the inert form in his arms, he bore her toward the house, Jessie Sterling following in a sort of awe, mixed with rage and revolt against the curse he had pronounced against her, wondering if there could be any fateful occult power to cause its fulfillment. With a heart as heavy as lead, Chester Olyphant bore his burden up the steps to the hall, where Miss Tuttle met him, shrieking, "Oh, heaven, have mercy! What has happened to Leola?" She was appalled when he groaned in anguish, "Alas, I found her dead in the arbor. Lead the way to her room." "Not dead! Oh, no, it cannot be! Surely it is only a faint. Come this way," sobbed the governess, and in a few moments Leola was placed on her little white bed among the dainty pillows no wider than her face. Miss Tuttle felt for her heart, but there was no faint throb to give hope of life. "Oh, bring a doctor, do bring a doctor, Mr. Chester. I cannot surely believe she is dead. Once I saw her lie like this half an hour when she had fallen from a horse, and she may revive this time too. Oh, please, please bring Dr. Barnes at once," she exclaimed excitedly, and, as he flew to do her bidding, she fell to undressing the girl, tenderly but swiftly, saying to Jessie, who stood near, looking on stupidly, "Run, run to the kitchen and tell Betsy I must have some warm water for a bath for Leola. She may be in a sort of spasm." Jessie Sterling ran out of the room, but she did not carry the message to the kitchen. Instead, she sought out her uncle, to whom she said, with an injured air, "Oh, Uncle Herman, I'm so glad I came this morning, for I have detected a villain in a plot to ruin poor Leola. You remember how I told you I was betrothed to Chester Olyphant, a millionaire of New York, and that he was gone on a yachting tour for a few weeks? Well, this morning I found that, instead of going yachting, as he pretended, the unprincipled villain, who knew of Leola from me, had come down here masquerading as Ray Chester, an artist, making love to poor, innocent Leola. This morning he came upon us in the arbor, and when I exposed him to the girl, she fell in a swoon so deep that it looks like death." A bitter oath shrilled over Wizard Herman's lips, and he cried, "Where is he, the villain? Let me get my hands on his throat." "He is gone to bring Dr. Barnes, uncle, but he will be back with him presently. And were I you, dear uncle, I should wreak vengeance on the wretch for his double treachery. To me, his betrothed, and to poor innocent Leola, whom he has deceived with his false protestations of love. You need not fear to anger me, for I will never marry him now. I hate him for his treachery," raged the artful girl, and her uncle responded, "I'll throw him down the steps and break every bone in his body if he ventures back here. But Leola is lying unconscious, you say. Have they brought her into the house?" "Yes. She is in her room, and her governess with her. I dare say she will revive presently, and as I cannot do anything more for her, I'll go help Mamma to unpack our trunks, while you watch for the doctor and that wretch, Chester Olyphant." And hoping in the bottom of her heart that not a bone would be left unbroken in the young man's body, hating him because he knew her for what she was, and because she could never win him back again, she flew to her mother to relate all that had occurred. "I told you so. I knew that day that Chester Olyphant was struck with the girl, and wanted to find her out. But you would not listen to me, and now you have lost him forever," was her comment. "Oh, I knew you'd have to go over all that, but even if I had known it, how could I have helped it?" was the ungracious reply. "Then what do you want me to do?" asked the querulous mother, and she quailed when Jessie whispered in her ear, I want you to go and help Miss Tuttle to revive Leola. That is, to pretend to, but really to see that she stays dead, for it would be joy to me to see Chester Olyphant bereaved of his love." "Jessie, you are mad, girl. I cannot aid in such a nefarious design," cried the poor nervous mother, trembling as with a chill. "Then I will manage it myself," Jessie hissed, rushing madly from the room to Leola's bedside. But Miss Tuttle gently barred her from the door. "Dr. Barnes is here, and he will not permit anyone in the room but myself, not even her betrothed," she said curtly, shutting the door calmly in Jessie's very face. Chapter 11. A Terrible Deed. Wizard Herman turned about, half stunned from his interview with Jessie Sterling, and went back to his laboratory, where he had been reading a new treatise on one of his favorite hobbies, the transmutation of the baser metals into gold. The man had no more heart or conscience than a clam, and his interest in chemistry was greater than his love for humanity. The greatest aim he had in life was to prosecute to a successful issue the two hobbies that had been the ruling passion of his life: to invent a magic elixir of life, and to create fabulous riches to sustain a life so lengthened in luxury. He was mad for gold wherewith to purchase the smallest specimen of a newly discovered mineral called radium, to which was ascribed the most remarkable properties ever heard of. But the price of this treasure was fabulous to a man in his situation, impoverished by a lifetime spent in this costly and vain pursuit of the unattainable. His great plan and hope had been to pay off the mortgage on the place, and to immediately place another upon it, so as to invest a portion in the new mineral from which so much was hoped and predicted in the scientific world. His rage at the failure of his plan was deep and bitter. With Leola dead, all his plans would come to naught. Old Bennet would foreclose the mortgage and ruin him. In his old age he must go forth a beggar into the world, friendless, and without a place to lay his head. Through this terrible trick of fate, all his plans and aspirations must be wrecked, and science lose, perhaps, the magnificent discoveries to which he had devoted his life. No wonder he was filled with a blind fury against Chester Olyphant, through whose treachery Leola's death had come to pass, thus thwarting all his plans for future gain. He shut the treatise, whose reading had been so fatefully interrupted, and went out to watch for Chester Olyphant with murder in his heart. But while he had been talking with Jessie and putting away his precious treatise, time had slipped faster than he knew. Olyphant, who had met the doctor close by in the road, had quickly returned with him, and he had gone up to Leola's room. The young man, himself a prey to the bitterest anxiety, with hope and fear commingled, was waiting in the wide sunny hall for news, when he came face to face with the grim master of the house, like a ravening lion seeking for prey. He forced a smile upon his pallid lips, and exclaimed eagerly, "Ah, Mr. Herman, I have been wishing to see you, sir. He got no further, for Wizard Herman, temporarily mad with baffled hope and bitter resentment, suddenly raised his hand, in whose clenched fingers gleamed a heavy iron instrument, and in an access of fury struck unerringly at the brown curly head bent courteously before him. It was a blow that might have felled an ox. Chester Olyphant, taken off guard, ignorant of the fact that he was in the presence of one temporarily or morally insane, received the blow full, and went down before it without a struggle, yielding up life in one short, choking gasp that was like a thunderclap in the ears of his foe. For all in a moment there came over the frenzied murderer a wild realization of his deadly crime, and bending down to peer at the still white face of the fallen man, he groaned in horror of his sin and its consequences. "Dead! Dead! Why, I did not mean to strike so hard. I never thought one blow could kill. What shall I do? No one must find me here. I must fly." At this incoherent moment, while he was rising from the body of his victim, there came slouching through the wide sunny hall the figure of his man-of-all-work, Jocelyn, a strange, hideous, taciturn man, yet devoted to his master's service through many thankless years. Jocelyn stopped and stared in bewilderment, glaring at the uncanny scene. Wizard Herman, peering up at him in consternation, whimpered like a beaten hound. "I didn't mean to hit so hard. He was too easy to kill. If they find me here, they'll hang me for murder. Save me, Jocelyn." The hideous servitor, conscious of but one thing, his master's peril, was quick to hear and heed. At any moment someone might come in at the open door, and one glance meant detection of the hideous crime his master had wrought. Jocelyn looked stupid, but his master knew it was only in looks. His brain was keen and alert, as he had proved many a time before. Just one moment he paused, hesitated. Then his dull eyes gleamed beneath the bushy brows, and he was prepared for action. They were just in front of the library door, and swooping down like an eagle on his prey, he caught up Chester Olyphant's limp body in his long, wiry arms and dragged him inside the room. Herman staggered after him with quaking limbs and a ghastly face. Then Jocelyn softly shut and locked the door. The two old men, who had grown gray in each other's confidence and service, grim old men who had outgrown pity or interest in youth and love and all that was sweetest in the world, now stood face to face, and between them, on the floor, that limp body that, now cold and senseless, had been but a little while ago a picture of manly strength and splendor, with a heart throbbing fast with the passion of youth. "Who saw you do it?" Jocelyn demanded gruffly. "Not a soul," whimpered the craven wretch. "You see, I did it in a passion before I thought, because he—" But Jocelyn's coarse, hairy hand, upraised, commanded silence. "Don't waste time now to tell why 'twas done. The thing is that you did it, and that you must hide it or swing for it," he said, with rough emphasis that made his master cower again like a beaten hound. The servant knelt down and examined the silent victim. "Dead as a doornail and getting cold already. You hit him a terrible whack, sir, on his head. Must have fractured his skull the way it feels." "I didn't know I had such strength. I hit harder than I meant. I began Herman weakly, but the man shut him off. "No use scrying over spilt milk. What's done is done, and now we gotta hide the corpse, and let it go as one of the mysterious disappearances we read about every week in the newspapers." "Jocelyn, how clever you are! Oh, if we can only manage it! But I cannot think clearly. My brain's on fire ever since Jessie came with her terrible story, and tempted me to kill him because of the hearts he had broken, hers and Leola's too, so that she wanted vengeance on him for their wrongs. So I seized that iron wedge and went to watch for him, and the minute he spoke to me I struck, and he fell. He's dead, and he deserved it. I am not sorry, only I don't want to be found out," Herman mumbled on, unheeded by the other, who stood with his brows wrinkled in profound thought. He chuckled suddenly, and Herman muttered, "You have a thought, clever Jocelyn. You will save me." "Perhaps so, sir, if I can work out my plan." Yes? "You know what's under this floor, sir?" "The underground passage where my ancestors used to hide from the Indians. Yes. Can we drop him through?" "Sure, if I can get the tools in here to rip up some flooring and put it back. Will you stay here locked in while I push them into the window, for I daren't bring them into the hall?" "Yes, go, quickly," and he let him out and closed and locked the door again, waiting, with a chill of horror at his heart, of the white and silent thing lying at his feet. Presently there was a noise outside the window, and he went and took in the tools that Jocelyn reached up to him. Then he admitted him, and they went at their gruesome work of hiding the mute witness of that terrible crime. In the midst of their task came a light rap on the door. "Uncle Herman, I want you," Jessie said excitedly. "I am engaged. Excuse me," he bawled hoarsely through the keyhole. "All right," she answered after a moment's hesitation. "I only wanted to tell you about Leola. Dr. Barnes says she is not dead after all, and he is bringing her around. Do you hear?" "Yes, I hear, Jessie. Now go away like a good girl. I cannot be disturbed," he assured her, turning back to Jocelyn in time to see him lift Chester Olyphant's body and let it fall through the opening in the floor. Chapter 12. A Wayside Flower. "Look in my face, my name is Might Have Been. I am also called No More, Too Late, Farewell." Leola sat up in bed among the white covers, scarcely wider than her face, and smiled wanly into Miss Tuttle's anxious eyes. "I am sorry that I am better. I wish I had died," she said bitterly. For 24 hours she had been threatened with brain fever, but now the crisis had passed, and she was improving. Dr. Barnes, who had been very uneasy all this time, had said just now she would soon be well, that her youth and fine constitution had tided her safely over the danger point. These 2 days Miss Tuttle had nursed her most carefully, admitting, by the doctor's orders, no one but himself. In vain Jessie Sterling pleaded to come in and help nurse the patient. Miss Tuttle sent her ruthlessly away. "Dr. Barnes exacts perfect quiet and trusts her only to me," she said proudly. Jessie retired, baffled and angry, to cogitate over the mystery of Chester Olyphant's disappearance. For since he had gone to bring the doctor to Leola, no one had seen his face. Jessie had by no means expected him to retreat from the field of battle. Instead, she had looked for him to march off with victory on his banners, the battle gained, the prize won. She knew that if Chester could get an opportunity to tell her uncle that he was rich and would pay off the mortgage on Wheatlands, he could easily gain his ends and marry Leola. It was in dread of this that she had incited him to anger against Chester, hoping to prevent their coming to an understanding. But Chester's unexplained disappearance had startled and surprised everyone, for only this morning Mrs. Gray, the widow at whose cottage home he boarded, had come to Wheatlands to seek him, saying he had not been back for 2 days. Diligent inquiry revealed the fact that Dr. Barnes was the last person who had seen him at all, having left him alone in the hall the day he had brought him to see Leola. Widow Gray was quite alarmed, and did not know what to think. "He certainly expected to return, for he did not take his trunk away," she said, but Mr. Herman made light of the matter. "Go home and don't worry. He has perhaps been called away by a telegram and will be back in due time," he said. "Indeed, I hope so, sir. He was a very fine young man, and I hope he has come to no harm," she protested, and again the wizard laughed. "How could he come to harm in broad daylight in my house?" "That's so, sir. I don't see how he could indeed, but I hope I shall hear from him soon, for I had bad dreams last night, and my mind misgives me," she sighed. Then she asked if she might see the sick girl, but was told she was too ill. Thereupon she went away, sighing, with a very long face, saying to herself, "If I had told that horrid old man, he would not have believed me, but last night I heard spirit voices sobbing in the pine tree outside my window, and whenever I hear that, it's a sure sign of trouble." While she went slowly out of the gate, Miss Tuttle was watching her from the window, and she said to the pale girl sitting back among the pillows, "There goes Mrs. Gray. I suppose she has been to inquire about you." Leola's wistful eyes looked at her with a mute question, and she answered gently, "You're thinking of Mr. Chester Olyphant, I know, dearie, and I had better tell you and get it off your mind. He has gone away." "Gone away!" Leola repeated, trembling, her lips white, her eyes somber with misery. "Yes, gone away, and a good riddance, I say, for how could he face you again after all that has happened? He has nearly broken Miss Sterling's heart as well as yours, and she vows she will never speak to him again for your sake. Only think of the great monster, engaged to her and coming off down here to make love to you because you were so pretty and so innocent. There was not a word he could say in his own defense, nothing but to sneak away like a hound beaten for stealing. Yes, he is gone, and I hope that is the last of him." Leola's white, trembling hands hid her face, but presently she spoke wearily through her fingers. "I have just one favor to ask you, dear Miss Tuttle. Never mention his name to me again, so that I may find it easier to forget." Alas, would she find oblivion of pain so easily? When vain desire at last and vain regret go hand in hand to death, and all is vain, what shall assuage the unforgotten pain and teach the unforgetful to forget? To her own heart the unhappy girl was saying, "Oh, why did I not die when I found that he was false and my dream of love over? Why linger on when the charm is gone from life, and I must live on, shamed, humiliated, by the thought that Jessie Sterling's proud, rich lover stooped from the height where he should dwell to pluck a wayside flower, then trample it beneath his feet. Oh, it is torture to think he held me so lightly. Chapter 13. In the Spider's Web. She wondered that she did not die of her shame and despair, so keen was her pain and humiliation, but the day wore to sunset and she was still alive, although the face of the whole world had changed to her in 24 hours, so that the blue of the sky and the gold of the sun no longer seemed fair, and the bird-songs in the trees outside had changed to notes of sadness that fell coldly on her heart. There came to her a sharp memory of the little song she had once loved, the one that had lingered on her lips the day she rode so blithely away on Rex to meet her fate in the beautiful dark blue eyes that had been so false and fair. Honey flowers to the honeycomb, and the honey bees from home. A honeycomb and a honey flower, and the bee shall have his hour. A honeyed heart for the honeycomb, and the honey bee flies home. A heavy heart in the honey flower, and the bee has had his hour. I am going to let you sit in this easy chair by the window to watch the beautiful July sunset, and Mr. Herman wants to come in and see you, Miss Tuttle said, placing the chair ready and dressing her patient in a soft white wrapper. But it was Jessie Sterling who pushed open the door and tripped in, first taking advantage of its being unlocked. "Poor dear! How changed you look! How pale! How ill! It was a terrible shock to you to find out how Chester Olyphant had deceived you, was it not?" she twittered loquaciously, coolly taking a chair in front of Leola and adding, "You may well fancy it was a shock to me, too, to find him down here flirting with you when I thought him safe on a yacht thousands of miles away. Did Miss Tuttle tell you he has gone away in a huff at being found out, and without leaving any word for me? Yes, he has gone, and at first I vowed I never would forgive him his flirtation with you, but, well, when I go back to New York perhaps I will relent, after he has coaxed long enough. We really are very fond of each other, you know, though Chester cannot help flirting any more than he can help breathing. I shall never let him know how hard you took it, for that would flatter his vanity too much." His vanity, dear heaven! And she had believed he loved her, thought Leola, with silent shame and despair. She could not bear to look at Jessie, his jubilant betrothed, sitting there in her pretty fashionable gown and fluffy flaxen locks, in a wavy aureole over her white brow. She wished secretly that the girl would go away and leave her alone with her wounded heart. But Jessie went on eagerly. "When I consent to forgive him for this, I shall scold him roundly, you may be sure, Leola, and I shall pretend to him that after that little fainting fit you came around all right, and despised him for his duplicity, and vowed you would never see him again. He shall not think, the vain creature, that you wore the willow an hour for his sake. I will pretend you had other lovers to take his place. That will be true, for there is Mr. Bennet who adores you, although you have flouted him so badly. As for me, if I were in your place I'd marry Bennet out of hand, to show Chester Olyphant how little I cared about him. That would take the conceit out of him quicker than anything you could do." So she twittered on artfully, until Leola's lovely face grew crimson with shame at her own weakness in caring so much for one so unworthy. Without saying one word, her somber eyes turned to the setting sun. She writhed with secret shame that Jessie could think she cared so much for her frivolous lover. Oh, if she could only tear this pain from her heart, only smile again as before this cruel blow that had nearly struck her dead with its agony. As Jessie chattered on, she began to feel a passionate contempt for the man as the pretty blonde depicted him, shallow, vain, unscrupulous. "Shall it not be scorn to me to harp on such a mouldering string? I am shamed through all my nature to have loved so slight a thing." With sudden angry passion, her dark eyes flashing, she turned upon the artful girl. "Please speak no more to me on that subject, Jessie. You weary me. I despise the man. I wish never to hear his name again," she cried bitterly, and her weakness seemed to fall from her in passionate contempt. "Poor Leola! I cannot blame you," cried the triumphant blonde cheerfully, just as the door opened again and Wizard Herman glided softly into the room. "Ah, Leola, you are better. I am very glad," he said in a smooth, oily voice, taking the chair Jessie vacated, saying she must go to Mamma. She nodded wearily without speaking, wishing they would all leave her alone, for every human face seemed hateful to her now. She would not meet his eyes, or she would have seen that he looked ill and nervous too, and that his always furtive, unpleasant manner had grown more marked and repellent still. "Miss Tuttle," he added, "you may leave the room. I have private affairs to talk of with my ward." When they were quite alone, he turned back to her, saying earnestly, "I have come, Leola, to explain my private affairs to you, and to make one more appeal to you to help me out of my trouble." She listened without replying, the deep, somber eyes fixed on the fading sunset beyond the distant hills, and Wizard Herman continued. "For years I have been heavily in debt, and had to borrow money from my rich neighbor, Mr. Bennet, to meet my living expenses and take care of you, Leola, in proper style for a pretty young girl. You have had your governess, your horse, your clothing, without a care on your young mind. But I, in order to meet your expenses and keep this roof over your head, have been obliged to place a mortgage of $15,000 on Wheatlands, and tomorrow the mortgage falls due. If Bennet forecloses, as he swears he will, we shall all be turned out homeless." It was on her lips to say that she did not care, that nothing really mattered to her now, but she bit her lips and held back the words, waiting silently to the end. "I have no means of paying my debt. I cannot possibly raise the money. But neighbor Bennet has been very generous. He has offered to forego his pay, to destroy the mortgage, on one condition. Are you listening, Leola?" She nodded, without turning her gaze from the sunset hills, and he continued eagerly. "I think you know what is coming, Leola. Bennet has fallen madly in love with you, and he wants you for his wife. If you consent, he will settle $100,000 on you, and forego the debt I owe. As for the rest, when you are once his wife, you can wind the foolish old man around your fingers like a ribbon, and have your own way in everything. If you refuse, he swears he will turn us all out of doors in 24 hours. He paused and waited, but she did not speak, and realizing how futile would be the attempted exercise of authority, he fell to pleading. "Can you let this terrible calamity befall us, Leola? Me in my old age, you in your youth and beauty. Why, we would not have whereon to lay our heads if we angered Giles Bennet." The somber dark eyes turned to him questioningly. I have always supposed that you held money in trust for me, sir. I did not dream that I was an expense to you, as you say," exclaimed Leola. "Have I then no friends who can help us in our need?" "Not one, Leola, for I know nothing of your relations. To be plain, I took you, a pauper child, from the almshouse for pity's sake, and have reared you as well as though you had been my own daughter. The secret of your birth I kept, and it shall never pass my lips. But in the hour of my misfortune I appeal to you to pay the debt of gratitude you owe me, a debt that you can only pay by marrying Giles Bennet tomorrow." An icy shudder shook her weak frame. She felt that death were sweeter than such a fate. But the man who had befriended her young life was waiting with haggard eyes for her answer, waiting for her to save him from despair. And she, the pauper, nameless, homeless, save for Wizard Herman's charity, would it not be monstrous ingratitude to refuse his prayer? She faltered, recklessly, "I will marry the man." Chapter 14. A Little Conspiracy. When the rash words had passed Leola's lips, a great trembling seized upon her, a horror of life she had never felt before, and she longed to scream out aloud to him that she must take back her promise, that she could not bind her beautiful, throbbing young life to oily, unctuous Giles Bennet, the man more than twice her age, and who in no way could be her fitting mate, not if he paid $1,000,000 instead of what he offered. But when she saw Wizard Herman's radiant face, she dared not utter her passionate protest against being sold in the market, like a beautiful Circassian slave to the highest bidder. She feared a fit of violence, or that he might fall down dead at her feet of the revulsion of feeling from relief to disappointment. She restrained the words that ached in her throat, and leaned back, helplessly, in her chair, her eyes half shut, her face death white, her senses reeling, and heard, half-consciously only, the profuse thanks he was pouring out, and the dazzling picture he was painting of her future as a rich man's wife, even adding, consolingly, that the fat old man might drop off any day from apoplexy and leave her a rich and happy young widow. "Go, leave me," she sighed faintly, and he hurried out, nothing loath, to spread the good news. The next thing Leola knew, she was in bed again, and Miss Tuttle was reviving her with cold water on her face mixed with hot tears that fell from her own eyes. "Oh, Miss Tuttle, what are you crying about?" she sighed curiously. "Is it true, then, that he made me promise to marry Giles Bennet? Is that what you mean?" "Yes. He says you promised to marry that wretch tomorrow." Oh, this will break my heart." And poor Miss Tuttle and Leola, clasped in each other's arms, mixed their tears together. When they grew a little calmer, Leola explained how the promise had been extorted from her by appeals to her gratitude. "Oh, do you think it can be true? Am I only a pauper, taken from the almshouse, for charity's sake, perhaps nameless too?" she sobbed bitterly. Miss Tuttle could give her no comfort, for although she had been Leola's governess from the age of 3, she had never fathomed the mystery about her charge. But she tried to reassure her, saying, "Do not brood over it, dear girl. It is possibly one of old Herman's false tales to coerce you into obedience. I should sooner believe that he has appropriated to his own use money that belonged to you, and thinks he can make it up to you this way. To live with Giles Bennet as his wife, that old Falstaff of a man, I loathe the prospect," sobbed Leola. "While I envy you with all my heart," exclaimed the governess. "Oh, Leola, how strangely fate plays at cross purposes with human beings! How gladly I would change places with you and become his wife." "Oh, that you could, dear soul," Leola answered, and neither one slept that night for the tumult of their thoughts. Leola's all grief and repugnance, Miss Tuttle's all envy and wounded love. And when the sunshine of the July morning peeped into the windows, their faces were haggard and pain-drawn, and both felt as if the day of execution had dawned, for Herman had told the governess to prepare Leola to be married at sundown that evening, when the carriage would be waiting to convey her at once to her new home. With heavy eyes they looked into each other's faces, wondering how they could escape their doom, and Leola cried desperately, "There is one chance left, and I shall take it. When I have paid my debt of gratitude to my guardian by marrying Giles Bennet, I shall not be among the living tomorrow." "Do you mean it, Leola?" "I swear it," answered the girl recklessly, and Miss Tuttle knew, by the somber gaze of the beautiful dark eyes, that it was true. Life, that had flowed along like a silvery rippling stream between flower-fringed banks, had suddenly become a muddy torrent rushing onward to destruction, and naught could stay its onward course. Desperate, reckless, she was ready to rush unbidden into the great beyond, daring the unknown future in terror of the awful present. "Oh, Leola, you must not. It would be a terrible sin. Promise me you will not," cried the poor soul timorously. But Leola's shut lips kept a deadly silence, and Miss Tuttle continued, conciliatory, "If you could escape this marriage, Leola, would you then be willing to live?" The sudden gleam of hope in the dark eyes assured her that Leola might yet find something to live for in her shadowed life, and she continued, "Dearie, I have a plan that might help you. I've been turning it over and over in my mind, but I never should have broached it had it not been for your dreadful threat." "Tell it to me," implored the girl, and glancing cautiously around that none might overhear, Miss Tuttle bent and whispered some rapid words into Leola's ear. A light began to dance in the dark eyes. The pale lips smiled a little, and Leola cried, "It will be a terrible risk to run, but if you can manage it and are not afraid, I will help all I can, for I long to punish Giles Bennet for his meanness." "I'll take all the responsibility for everything," smiled Miss Tuttle, glowing with eagerness. Don't you worry one bit, Leola. It will all come right in the end. But, oh dear, I've got to put in a busy day getting the bride ready. Make her as pretty as you can, and let the veil be very thick," laughed Leola with renewed good humor. "And, by the way, Miss Tuttle, you are to tell my guardian that before the ceremony begins, Giles Bennet must destroy the mortgage in my presence, or I will not marry him at all." So the busy day began, for the whole household was in a state of excitement over the sudden wedding. Mrs. Sterling and her daughter entered heartily into the spirit of the affair, and set the servants to work transforming the dingy parlor into a floral bower with wildflowers and evergreens. The scheming pair were delighted to think of getting rid of Leola so easily, hoping that some fortunate turn of fortune's fickle wheel might yet bring back Chester Olyphant into Jessie's power. While they worked downstairs on the parlor, Miss Tuttle reported herself as very busy upstairs, getting ready the simple outfit of the bride and packing her trunk for the flitting. Leola would not admit anybody else inside the door. She said she was too busy and too nervous. Inside that locked door, there were strange doings, to be sure. You would have thought them a pair of amateur actresses from the way they went on. The governess had dragged down from the garret a little old trunk containing some stage properties that had once upon a time belonged to an actress who had died while on a visit to Wizard Herman's mother. Her relatives had never taken away the box, and many a time Leola had amused herself looking over the queer things on rainy days when she could not go out. She and Miss Tuttle were amusing themselves again, brushing and combing over the old wigs, Leola trying on the sedate brown front, and Miss Tuttle the curly golden one, that certainly took 15 years off her age, after Leola made up her sallow face with rouge and powder. Then Miss Tuttle tried on Leola's best gown, the dark brown cloth with the silk waist and loose jacket. The pretty brown toque was not unbecoming, with the double veil of white dotted malins, and Leola, who had never expected to smile again, had to giggle like a little schoolgirl at the tout ensemble. "Oh, Miss Tuttle, you will make a lovely bride. I am sorry I shall not have a handsome gift for you," she cried. "You will have given me the desire of my heart," cried the governess, so seriously and gratefully that Leola laughed harder than ever, thinking she was certainly very easy to please, since portly Giles Bennet could fill the measure of her happiness. It made her think of the old adage Betsy, the cook, had repeated to her the other day. "Everybody to their taste, missy, as the old woman said when she kissed the cow." However, it was very lucky for Leola that Miss Tuttle was so infatuated with the rotund widower that she was willing to win him by hook or crook, so her laughter grew more and more joyous as she added merrily, "Be sure that you put a little water in all the kerosene lamps about the house, so that they will flicker and grow dim."